All right, and to wrap up what is turning out to be the absolute longest podcast of all time, we have Joker FOLIE A DEUX. And I apologize that the podcast is so long. You can go check out the entire podcast. As always, I post clips from each segment later on in the week as well. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm posting them a little bit out of order. So you might see some of these clips before the actual podcast is posted. But the reason that this podcast is a little bit long is just because a lot of these clips are reviews. And reviews, I just want to share my thoughts. So let's talk about Joker 2, Joker FOLIE A DEUX. This is going to be a non-spoiler and then a spoiler review. So I will be doing non-spoilers first, and then I will very clearly give a spoiler warning, and we will dive into all the spoilers and some of my thoughts on Joker FOLIE A DEUX. So just to give a little bit of context, as I always like to do before I jump or dive into the review, let me tell you what I thought about the first Joker film. So I didn't see Joker 1 in theaters. I saw it, I think, a little bit later, right as it was coming out on streaming or digital or whenever it was coming out. I saw it around then because it had gotten a lot of buzz and people were saying, oh, Joaquin Phoenix is going to win the Oscar, and oh, this might even be one of the first superhero film to be nominated for Best Picture, or maybe not. I think Black Panther was right before. But anyways, one of the first superhero films to be nominated for Best Picture, whatnot. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a go. And so I watched the first Joker. This was 2019, I believe. I watched the first Joker, and I thought it wasn't for me. What is the best way I would describe my experience with the first Joker. I didn't come out of the first Joker saying, this writing is terrible, the story is terrible, the characters are terrible, the acting is terrible, this is a bad movie. That's not at all the experience I had with the first Joker. But I also came out of it saying, I don't think I can say I liked it, because I just don't think this movie is for me. I understand a lot of what the social commentary was, right, about what society can do to people and the oppressed and the downtrodden, and how it can really lead to some very bad things for everyone involved, right? And, I think that that's a very important thing to take away from that film, is that I think we as people need to do a better job and, understand that, there are some really bad things that can happen in society when we, ignore people who are really suffering. And I think that that's a big part of the film. And I think the second film expands on that in a couple interesting ways about Arthur Fleck in particular that I think I'll dive more into in the spoiler discussion, but I'll touch on a little bit in the spoiler review. But I think the first film had a lot to say about society, and also obviously Arthur Fleck and people who are dealing with mental illness or have conditions or whatnot. I think that the first film definitely had a lot to say about that as well. I think that, obviously Joaquin Phoenix was brilliant, even though I still maintain to this day, I watched almost every Oscar film that came out that year, Best Picture winner at least, and I think Adam Driver deserved it for Marriage Story. That is just my personal opinion. But that doesn't take anything away from Joaquin Phoenix. He did a brilliant job just combining that laugh alone, where he's able to laugh and almost cry at the same time. And this, in this film, even more so, we get to see that laugh again in a couple different contexts in Joker 2. And it's always haunting. It's great. Great in the sense of it's hard to watch, but it's great to see, an actor of that caliber really giving it his all. And I think that, for me, at the end of the day, there are a couple things about the ending that I didn't love. I'm a person who, I don't mind bad endings to films. Bad meaning, endings that are quote unquote heroes. I'm not saying for Joker. I don't know who the hero of Joker would be, but just films where if it's a traditional good guy, bad guy, the hero loses or whatever, or something tragic happens at the end. I mean, for goodness sake, if you watch my channel long enough, you'll know Infinity War is my favorite MCU film of all time, and I think that has the bleakest ending of any MCU film, which is kind of crazy to me. But I think that film had a definitiveness and a sense of, okay, like I understand why and how we got to this point. I think Joker, the first Joker, was, it was a little bit of just too much of this kind of open-endedness that made me feel a little bit dissatisfied with the ending, especially that thing of, was it real, was it not? I kind of hate that on balance. I think that there are a few times where it does seem interesting to me. But in most movies, when the ending is like, is it real? Is it not? And then it's like, well, you decide. It's like, okay, figure it out. I think Inception may be one example, for example. But I just to say that I think the ending was a little bit off to me. So this isn't a review of the first Joker, obviously, but that's just to set the scene here as I was entering this second Joker film. So I had heard that, we did an entire podcast about how mixed the reviews were for the second Joker, excuse me. But at the time, right? Because those reviews came out about 3 weeks ago, three or 4 weeks ago. And Rotten Tomatoes still held that film at about a 67% or something like that, which is fine. Maybe 62%, something like that. And that's fine. It's not great. And the first Joker, in its defense, was nominated for Best Picture. It won Joaquin Phoenix Best Actor, and it had a 68 or 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I was like, okay, on par. I think that what I should go into the second Joker expecting is about the same of the first Joker, because I think that it, from the reactions, people were calling it brilliant, people were calling it crazy and messy and a disaster, and I was like, okay, we'll see. And so I went into the second Joker kind of expecting to feel the same about the film as I did the first Joker. Now, before I dive into the review, one more thing. I actually came out of the movie, excuse me, and I just checked Rotten Tomatoes just to see what was going on, and it is, to my shock, it is sitting at a 33% right now. People do not like this film. Like I'd 67 or 66% or whatever it was when it first started was maybe 30, 40, 50 reviews. It wasn't nothing, right? It was still a sizable amount, and usually when you have about 50, 60 reviews, it doesn't oscillate that much. Maybe from 65 it could go to 50 and it could go to 80. Like I don't know. But to go to 33% after 250 some reviews have come in is actually wild. So let's talk about Joker Folie A Deux, non-spoilers first. So I will say that my experience with Joker Folie A Deux was in 3 parts. And I'm not going to give anything away. Because I think that if you intend on seeing the film, go in and know as little as possible, But I'll be talking about things that we know from the premise and the trailer and whatnot. Like Harley Quinn's in the movie. Sorry, that was in the trailer. It's, Joker Madness of 2, Folie A Deux. So my experience with the film was in 3 parts. I think the first 30 minutes, I was in wait and see mode. And I wasn't necessarily engaged per se. Like the film did not have me like a film like, for example, Knives Out. Knives Out had me in the first 10 minutes, and I was so on board, so hooked, and it built and built and built. The first 30 or so minutes of Joker Folie A Deux, I was like, okay, so they're throwing a lot at me, not just in terms of story, really, just a lot of things at me, a lot of concepts and ideas and a lot of things that I can talk about more in the spoiler discussion. And I was sitting there going, there are ways in which these things can pay off, and ways in which if it was I'm going to say this a little bit facetiously, but a skilled filmmaker, because I'm not saying that Todd Phillips isn't a skilled filmmaker. I'm just saying, just to give some clarity, a skilled filmmaker could weave these things together to make something that is really interesting and cohesive towards the end. So in the first 30 minutes of any movie, honestly, even if I think it's terrible, I'm not going to write it off, because I'm like, well, there are ways in which you can wrap it up, especially in a film like Joker Folie A Deux, when there are so many interesting concepts on their own that I think could have, I think could have really coalesced into something interesting. But that was the first 30 minutes. I was sort of in this weird limbo state of, I don't think I like this very much. I think it's very similar to the first Joker, where I feel like I'm just watching something happen that I'm not completely engaged in, but it's happening and I'm watching it. So there was that. The next 30 minutes of the film, I thought was quite good. Actually, there was a pocket of the movie that I was on board for. I don't know what it was. I do know. There were a couple things that were going on in that second chunk, the second 30 minutes. It's like minute 31 to 60-ish. I'm not saying it's exact. That I thought was really intriguing. I thought, okay, it's helping to tie together some of the things from those first 30 minutes. Not everything, but some things from the first 30 minutes. And then, it's introducing a couple new twists and turns that I thought could pay off big time towards a very interesting ending. Now, this is a minor spoiler. It's really nothing about the story itself, just more about the structure of the film. So if you don't want to know, skip ahead about 30 seconds. I had heard that there was something weird that happened at the end of the film. So I was preparing myself for something weird to happen at the end. What I will say is this. I don't think it was, I think I kind of get what people were talking about when they said that. I think that really in general, as you know, I said the first 30 minutes was one experience, the second 30 minutes was another experience. The last hour was a completely different experience entirely. There was one sequence in the film that when it started, it made me very uncomfortable. And then another thing happened that made me also equally as uncomfortable. And obviously it was intentionally so, I think, by Todd Phillips. And, you know, that kind of goes back to that. It's just not the kind of thing I enjoy watching. In fact, I'm actively sitting there in my seat, very uncomfortable. And I don't think in a good way, even though it was intentional. And from then on, it was just kind of spaghetti against the wall again, but just crazier and even stranger and even more disparate. And by the time the film ended, I was like, I feel like I just saw 700 different things happen in the last hour. And I don't quite know what to make of any of it. So, you know, I think that was my experience with Joker FOLIE A DEUX. Just to talk about other aspects of the film before I kind of get back to the story, Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic again. Now, I don't think everything he was asked to do in this film, because I think the first Joker, for what it's worth, he was a pretty singular character. I think that he was pretty consistent, and while he was crazy and having delusions, like with Zazie Beetz' character, Sophie, something like that, he was still very much Arthur Fleck, and he was still very much Joker. In this movie, he's asked to do a lot more. I mean, number one is singing, which, you know, I don't think he was meant to sing like a Broadway star. He's fine. He gives it his all, which Joaquin Phoenix will always do, and that's fine, right? But, you know, he's asked to do, other than singing and dancing, he's asked to do a lot more. And I'm not saying a lot more in terms of, you know, asked to elevate the material. I'm just saying literally quantity-wise, just more things in this movie. And I think for what it's worth, he does them, and he commits to them, and he's, you know, I think for what the direction was, he probably did about as good as any actor could possibly do. And there are those tragic moments as well where, you know, there are scenes where he's laughing and you can see such utter pain behind that laugh. And it's that those are the parts where I really commend Joaquin Phoenix for. I think those are just signs of a great actor. Harley Quinn, Lady Gaga, I think is fantastic. I think that, again, what she is asked to do, I'm talking about the performance, not the character. What Lady Gaga is asked to do, fantastic. I mean, you couldn't have asked for anyone better for this part. You know, again, we'll talk about what she was asked to do, but I think for what she was asked to play and portray, really, really good. Other characters are not as important or as interesting. I mean, it's honestly interesting because it's Joker FOLIE A DEUX, and I kind of expected it to be kind of equal parts, maybe not equal parts, but 60% Joker maybe and 40% Harley. It's maybe more like 75% Joker and 25% Harley, interestingly enough. Maybe even 80-20. Not in terms of screen time necessarily, but more importance of the characters, which I thought was actually something interesting and unexpected. You can take that for what you will, and I'm not necessarily saying that's a good or a bad thing, but I think going back to what Lady Gaga was asked to do, I just don't think there was that much. There were moments where I thought this character has a lot of depth and dimensionality, and those moments were very fleeting, because I think that when you look back at this character after the film is over, you kind of go, I don't quite understand ultimately what we were going for here. I kind of get how she relates to maybe Arthur, but as a character in herself, I don't understand. It feels like we only scratched the surface of a very interesting character that we didn't get to spend a lot of time with. Now, in terms of other things, I mean, cinematography, it's great. I mean, the musical sequences are shot really well. And they're interesting to look at, and just like the first, everything from the first Joker film that are, the stuff that's not in the musical sequences, it's pretty much the same in terms of quality. It's great. It has that very distinct look of Gotham City for sure, and the score itself is also really good. I believe the same person who scored the first film, I don't remember their name, but is back to score the second film, and it's really good. It's good. In terms of the music, which I know is a part that we actually covered all the way back when, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we talked about how Lady Gaga was cast in Joker FOLIE A DEUX, and that it was going to be a musical. It's hard for me to call this a musical. I get it now why Todd Phillips said, well, no, it's not a musical. But it's not a musical either. And I think, you can kind of understand what Todd Phillips is trying to do with the musical numbers here. In fact, I think it's pretty obvious what he's trying to do with the musical numbers. I think the problem is that it just feels a little too over the head, over the top, hitting you over the head with it, and it doesn't really. I think there are some of musical numbers that really help you understand what's going on and give you much better insight into what's happening, and actually add a layer of emotionality, which I think that they should be doing. And there are others that just feel like, okay, we need to move on. Like, we get it. I get what the point of this is. We need to move on. And I ultimately think that the musical numbers, because everyone was like, oh, Joker 2 is going to be musical, that's what's going to make it so interesting. The musical numbers, honestly, were one of 1,000 things that they tried to do in this film. And, just, again, spaghetti against the wall. Some things stuck half the time. This is one of those things that just kind of stuck half the time. And even then, it kind of just clung on barely, because I think most of the musical numbers, I was like, okay, at a certain point, let's keep moving. Now, I'll wrap up by saying, talking about the story just a little bit. I think that there are interesting themes in this movie. I think that there are interesting scenes in this movie. Like I said, there are scenes that also make me very uncomfortable. I'm sure that's intentional, and maybe some of you guys can watch those scenes and feel less, more engaged in what the movie's trying to say. I felt very much like I'm sitting in a theater, I'm watching these things happen, and I don't enjoy this. That being said, I think that ultimately what this comes down to is, I think that there was a point in this movie, like I said, a 30-minute chunk in this movie where I said, this is better than the first Joker, in my opinion, as somebody who didn't love the first Joker, but I thought there is a better movie in here. There is a very good movie, in my opinion, in this movie. It's just buried, unfortunately. It happens for about 20 minutes, and then it's just buried. It has nothing to do with Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga's performances, and I think it just has everything to do with they tried too hard. They tried too hard to top the first film. They tried too hard. I don't think it's a lack of effort. I really think it's the opposite. I think they tried too hard, and ultimately what we ended up with was just kind of a bunch of everything, honestly. And I don't think the film really benefited from it. I really don't. So ultimately, if you liked the first Joker, I don't know if you're going to like this movie. I can't say for sure, because at the beginning I kind of thought, oh, no, if you like the first Joker, then you're definitely going to. By the end of this movie, I don't really know if I can say that, honestly. If you didn't like the first Joker, like me, I'm fairly confident you're not going to like this movie. I think that this movie was trying to do a lot and to say a lot. And there are things I can take away from this movie that are pretty interesting and pretty thought-provoking. But at the end of the day, this is not a movie I want to watch again. Again, neither was the first Joker. I don't particularly want to watch that movie again. So you can take that for what you will, right? You can say, oh, I don't really, I respect your opinion, but I am not going to, put it a one-to-one comparison to my own opinion because I love the first Joker. That's great. That's totally fine. And I would encourage you at that point, then if you want to see it, go see it for yourself. But for me, this was another example of, this is not a movie for me. I understand what they were going for, but even more so, this movie just felt like it was not for me. And I think that there were a lot of other things I could point to that were not necessarily things that popped up for me for the first Joker. So let's now move into the spoiler discussion. This is going to be full spoilers for just a few minutes here as we wrap up one of the longest episodes of Access Blockbusters Pod, one of the longest videos on this channel, I think. And we will talk about spoilers. So I was just stalling for a little bit. If you have not seen Joker FOLIE A DEUX, save this video, save this podcast, save this segment for later, and then come back and watch it once you have. All right, let's get into some spoilers. So let me just to break down what I was talking about here with my experience of those three parts of watching the film. The first 30 minutes, it opens up with a Warner Brothers cartoon, right? So I'm going, okay, interesting, right? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. It's interesting. It could pay off, right? It turns out it didn't really do much of anything. It was just kind of a thing that they threw against the wall, and it was entertaining and it was interesting. But okay, we start out with a cartoon. The music, I think that especially towards the beginning, the songs were just like, he's crazy, he's in his head, he's imagining things. Okay, I get it. I get it. I totally get it. Especially the first song where he's just dancing around the prison. I was like, I don't think I can take a whole movie of this, honestly, because I'm like, okay, I get it. He's, the movie itself admits this. He's imagining these things. Okay, I got it. So, the first movie, and then he meets Harley Quinn just kind of by happenstance, although it turns out that Harley really wanted to meet him, and obviously he feels so alone, and so it makes sense in a way, but it also feels kind of rushed and kind of sudden that they meet, but okay, fine. And then the trial begins. So I think this portion of the movie, especially where Harley and he are really falling in love or whatever, I was like, let's see where this is going. I'm not super on board with the music. I think that the actual story of the trial and everything is interesting but not captivating, and then him and Harley, Lady Gaga, again, fantastic, but I wasn't super on board with their love story or anything like that. But the 30 minutes that I was talking about where I was really on board with this movie, there are a couple things here that happen. Number one, it's revealed that this is not, Harley Quinn in this movie is not just another inmate. There's actually a couple extra layers to this character. She is a graduate student in psychiatrics or whatever it's called, but just like Harley Quinn, she's a psychiatrist. That's the word. I can't believe I couldn't think of psychiatrist. She's a psychiatrist. So okay, great. And then there's more backstory and the fact that they start unveiling the fact that she starts lying about things, and I think that is actually such an interesting way to develop this Harley Quinn character, where she almost thinks of this Arthur Fleck in a very sad, twisted way of like a case study. And I mean, in fairness, in the comics, that is sort of what is happening, right? Like Harleen Quinzel falls in love with the Joker, but she was trying to study him, rehabilitate him maybe at the beginning, and then she ends up just falling in love with him and they go on their crazy love romance story, right? But I think that that's such an interesting thing to get into. And he's like, are you just using me? I think that sequence, obviously in the trailer we saw the drawing the smile and then everything. I think that sequence was just a great sequence. And I think that's an example of the musical numbers working to its advantage, because especially the moments where Joker is doubting himself, he's like, do you really care? And then she shoots him in the dream sequence or whatever, in the fantasy sequence. And I think those are the moments when those sequences are actually informing what's going on in the movie itself and the character's mind. So that's the one thing that I was really hopeful was starting to work, right? Really start to get into gear here. And I was like, okay, on board. I'm on board. The second thing was actually the courtroom scenes. I think the first chunk of courtroom scenes where they're calling witnesses, where Arthur is very nervous, and then he's hearing things about himself that are triggering things, and also just the defense itself. Like, okay, so we're gonna try to defend the fact, at least from the defense's side, that he is two personalities and Harvey Dent too. That's fine. Like, it had to be a prosecutor, Harvey Dent, sure, whatever, doesn't matter. I think whatever, he burns half his face at the end, but I don't think it was supposed to be serious. We'll talk about that other potential Batman Dark Knight connection at the very, very end in just a second, but I don't think it was meant to be that serious. So Harvey Dent, sure, is presenting a case that, no, this is who Arthur is. And I think that all that stuff, actually, if the whole movie was honestly sort of like Trial of the Chicago 7 style, courtroom drama, or even more recently Anatomy of a Fall, if you guys haven't seen it, was nominated for Best Picture last year. I think if it was a courtroom drama, I would have been actually completely on board. Now, I mentioned that the film started to make me a bit uncomfortable at a certain point, and that was when Arthur took the mic and was really just going after Gary Puddles and using all those voices and accents, and that entire sequence, I was just sort of shrinking in my seat going, this is so uncomfortable for me. Just the way he was treating Gary. And I think that is the intention, right? So I'm saying this in two ways. I'm saying this as, I think Todd Phillips is trying to say here, because Gary has that outburst right at the end of it where he's like, you ruined my life. And I think that is Todd Phillips biting back and saying, you have to understand. And here's the thing, right? Like I mentioned, there are really interesting things, really interesting themes that this movie is trying to explore, building off of that first Joker. There is a good movie in here somewhere. And I think this sequence makes me uncomfortable to watch, but I think rightly so, because what Todd Phillips, I think, is trying to say is that there is a balance here of, I think Arthur Fleck is not well. He is dealing with his mental illness and he is struggling. And I think that it is very fair to say that it was, especially based on the first Joker, it was society that let him down. And obviously his upbringing, we talk a little bit more about his mother and how she abused him, unfortunately. And I think that it's true to say on the one hand that society really let him down. But on the other hand now, what Todd Phillips is trying to say, on the flip side, is that he has still done very, 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 very bad things to people. And I think that to minimize that is also kind of a mistake, right? And I think that there's a lot of gray area there. There's a lot of nuance there. And to sit in it for a while is something that I think is quite interesting. So again, it makes me uncomfortable, these scenes, but I think that that's sort of the point. And then obviously, not to get too into it because that's, this channel is more family friendly, I suppose, just talking in a way that anyone can watch these videos. But there's a sequence where he gets back to the prison and there's a scene with the guards. And again, it's just uncomfortable to me. And so I'll just leave it at that. But I mean, even after that, at that point, one other thing, it just feels like things are happening, right? Because I think Harley Quinn ceases to become a real character at that point. I don't understand what she's doing at all after that point. I think that the courtroom kind of becomes a farce. I mean, they keep saying it, let's not make it become a circus, but it's a circus until he takes the mic and really says, okay, I'm me, I'm Arthur. Again, interesting themes there of the people who bombed the courthouse saying, only seeing him as Joker when he really wants to be seen as Arthur. But again, I mean, the courthouse blows up, and even that was a little bit like, whoa, okay, where are we going here? And then he gets stabbed at the end, and it's like there's just a lot of things that are going on here. And, I've seen some things at this point about, is the guy at the end Heath Ledger's Joker? No, obviously not. I mean, Harvey Dent is in this movie, I mean, you would think that Batman, Christian Bale's Batman, if this somehow was the Dark Knight universe, was, would have known that there was a previous Joker, right? Like, so no, of course not. It's not Heath Ledger's Joker. I think it is implying that maybe Heath Ledger's Joker could have come from a similar place, like this. Sure, maybe. But again, I think that no, that's definitely not Heath Ledger's Joker. But anyways, I think that, like I said, there was just a lot of stuff that happened towards the end of the movie that I don't know. It was a lot of dark stuff, obviously, and it was a lot of sad stuff, and obviously Arthur is dead. And I think by the time I walked out of the movie, there were some really interesting things. There was a lot of potential, but it was kind of a disaster, especially towards the end. Like I mentioned, there was a sequence in this film, about 20-30 minutes, where I went, no, this is going somewhere. It's good. And then by the end of it, I just thought, I don't quite know what I watched, and I don't think I want to know. I think that I'm good with what I saw, and that's about it. So that'll do it, guys, for my thoughts on Joker FOLIE A DEUX. But I want to know, have you guys seen the second Joker film? And what did you guys think about it in the comments down below? Let me know. And let me know if you liked the first one more or the second one more. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on the first one in relation to the second one. And guys, that'll do it for, again, a ridiculously long episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. There are time codes in the description, as always, if you want to skip around. And also, these clips will be posted on YouTube anyway, so I hope that, whatever you were looking for, whatever you were trying to hear, or even if you've stuck it out all the way through 2+ hours, I appreciate you no matter what. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to subscribe, give this podcast a like if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, whatever it might be. And guys, that'll do it from me. I will see you guys in the next one.